The war that changed. European history forever. Europe, 1914. Imagine standing in a world that believes it has mastered its own destiny. Cities pulse with confidence. Empires stretch across continents. Kings, generals, and politicians move with the quiet certainty that history is under their control. Peace feels permanent. Progress feels unstoppable. And yet, beneath this polished surface, something is tightening. Something invisible but powerful enough to break everything. You are there, walking through crowded streets where people laugh, trade, celebrate. Newspapers speak of diplomacy, not disaster. No one senses how close everything is to collapse. No one feels the ground shifting beneath their feet, because the danger is not loud. It does not announce itself. It grows in silence, hidden in decisions made behind closed doors, in rivalries disguised as alliances, in pride disguised as strength. Now ask yourself this: what if the greatest turning point in history did not begin with chaos, but with absolute confidence? What if the moment that changed everything forever started in a world that believed nothing could go wrong? That is the tragedy of what came next. Europe did not walk into war screaming. It walked in blindfolded. And once that blindfold fell, it was already too late. The invisible pressure beneath the empires. Long before the first shot was fired, before the world even imagined what was coming, Europe was already at war with itself. Not openly, not visibly, but beneath the surface something was building. A pressure so intense that it did not need a large explosion to break the continent apart. It only needed the right moment. Empires stood tall, but they were not as stable as they appeared. Inside them, different peoples spoke different languages, believed in different futures, and dreamed of independence. Nationalism was not just an idea. It was a force growing in silence, pushing against the walls of empires that could no longer contain it. The more these empires tried to control it, the stronger it became. And the more they ignored it, the more dangerous it turned. At the same time, rivalries between nations were sharpening. Germany was rising fast, challenging the old balance of power. Britain watched carefully, unwilling to lose its dominance. France carried the memory of past defeat like an open wound, waiting for the right moment to reclaim its pride. Russia expanded its influence, while Austria-Hungary struggled to hold itself together from within. Every move was calculated. Every decision carried tension, but no one wanted to be the one to step back. Then came the alliances. On the surface, they were meant to prevent war. In reality, they created a system where one conflict could pull everyone in. A promise of protection became a trap. A single crisis would not remain local. It would spread, pulling nations into a chain reaction they could not control. And still, leaders believed this system would maintain peace. They believed they understood the game they were playing. But here is the question no one asked at the time. What happens when every nation prepares for war, while convincing itself that war will never happen? The answer was already forming quietly beneath their feet. And when the moment came, all that hidden pressure would be released at once. The fatal moment that exposed a broken system. June 28, 1914. A quiet morning in Sarajevo. The streets are lined with onlookers, curious, expectant, unaware that they are witnessing a moment that will echo through generations. An open car moves slowly through the city. Inside it sits Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the heir to one of Europe's most fragile empires. His presence is meant to display strength. Instead, it will expose weakness. At first, everything seems under control. The route is planned. Security is present. The empire believes it understands the risks. But what unfolds is not just a failure of protection, it is a glimpse into how fragile the entire system has become. A missed turn, a wrong decision. A young man steps forward, shots are fired, and in that instant, the illusion of stability begins to crack. The event itself is shocking, but the reaction is what truly matters. Austria-Hungary does not see this as an isolated act. It sees it as a direct challenge to its authority, a threat that must be answered, not cautiously, not diplomatically, but decisively. And behind that response lies something deeper, fear of losing control over a crumbling empire. Here is where everything begins to unravel, because the system that was supposed to maintain balance now begins to amplify conflict. One decision demands another. One response forces a counter-response. There is no space left for hesitation, no room for retreat. Each nation begins to move, not because it wants war, but because it feels it cannot afford not to act. And this is the moment that changes everything. Not because of the shots fired in Sarajevo, but because of what they reveal. A continent filled with powerful nations, unable to stop themselves. The question is no longer whether there will be a war. The question is how far it will go. The illusion of a controlled war. In the days that followed, something unsettling happened. No one panicked. No one spoke of catastrophe. Instead, leaders across Europe moved with calm precision, as if they were managing a crisis they fully understood. Orders were written, messages were sent, plans were activated. Everything felt deliberate. Everything felt controlled. Austria-Hungary believed it could punish Serbia quickly and restore its authority. Germany offered its full support, convinced that strength would prevent escalation. Russia prepared to defend its influence. France stood ready to back its ally. Britain watched, calculating its next move. Each nation acted with confidence, believing that this would remain a limited conflict, a short war, a controlled war. And here lies the dangerous illusion. Every leader thought they were making rational decisions. Every general believed their strategy would bring swift victory. Mobilization plans, designed years before, were now unfolding with mechanical precision. Once set in motion, they could not be stopped. Trains moved troops, borders tightened, armies advanced, and with every step forward, the possibility of turning back disappeared. No one wanted to appear weak. No one wanted to hesitate, because hesitation meant vulnerability, and vulnerability could mean defeat before the war even began. So they continued, step by step, deeper into a situation they no longer fully controlled. What was meant to deter conflict was now accelerating it. Pause for a moment and consider this. What happens when every side believes it is acting defensively while preparing for total war? What happens when confidence replaces caution at the exact moment caution is needed most? By the time they realized the scale of what they had unleashed, the machinery was already in motion. The war was no longer a possibility. It had become inevitable. The speed of collapse, how days turned into war. What should have taken months of negotiation unfolded in days. Decisions that would shape the fate of millions were made with urgency, pressure, and a growing sense that time itself was running out. Diplomats still spoke. Messages still crossed borders. But beneath the surface, something irreversible had already begun. Austria-Hungary issued its ultimatum to Serbia, harsh and designed to be rejected. Serbia responded with compromise, hoping to avoid escalation. It was not enough. War was declared. And in that moment, the first piece of the structure gave way. But instead of stopping the collapse, it triggered the rest. Russia began to mobilize, not to attack, but to protect its position and its allies. Germany interpreted this as a threat that could not be ignored. Mobilization was answered with mobilization. France prepared. Britain watched the balance shift. Every action forced a reaction. Every reaction accelerated the next decision. There was no pause, no reset, no second chance to rethink the path forward. Within days, what had started as a regional conflict spread across the continent. Borders closed, armies marched, railways carried thousands of soldiers toward front lines that did not exist just a week before. The system of alliances, once seen as a safeguard, now acted like a trap, pulling every major power into the same conflict. Ask yourself this: could it have been stopped? At any point? Was there still a moment where someone could step back and break the chain? The truth is far more unsettling. The speed of events made hesitation feel impossible. Leaders feared that delay would cost them everything. So they chose action over reflection, certainty over doubt. And just like that, Europe crossed a line it could not see, moving from tension into total war in a matter of days. Not slowly, not gradually, but with a speed that left no room for escape. The shock of reality, when war became something new. At the beginning, there was still belief. Soldiers marched with discipline, convinced they would return home before the leaves fell. Crowds gathered in train stations, cheering, waving, celebrating what they thought would be a brief display of strength. War, in their minds, still carried echoes of the past. Movement, honor, victory earned through courage. Then everything changed. The advance slowed, the lines froze, and the battlefield transformed into something no one had prepared for. Trenches carved the land into scars that stretched for miles. Men lived in mud, surrounded by water, rats, and the constant threat of death. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and the war refused to move. It held them there, locked in a brutal stalemate. This was not the war they had imagined. This was a machine. Artillery rained down without warning, tearing apart entire positions in seconds. Machine guns cut through advancing soldiers with terrifying efficiency. New weapons emerged, designed not just to defeat the enemy, but to break the human body and spirit. The battlefield became a place where survival itself felt uncertain, where courage alone was no longer enough. And here is the moment that changes everything for those who lived it. When a soldier realizes that this war cannot be won quickly, that there is no clear path forward, that every step out of the trench could be the last, the illusion collapses, replaced by a harsh and inescapable truth. What happens when war stops being a test of bravery and becomes a test of endurance? From that point on, the conflict was no longer about swift victory. It became a struggle of attrition, where nations poured everything they had into a fight that consumed lives, resources, and hope itself. And once that shift occurred, there was no turning back. The psychological breaking point of a generation. At some point, the battlefield stopped being the greatest threat. The real danger moved inside the mind. Imagine standing in a trench for days without rest. The ground shakes without warning. Explosions echo day and night. You do not know when the next strike will come, only that it will. Sleep becomes shallow. Thoughts become fragmented. Fear is no longer a reaction. It becomes a constant state. This is where the war reveals its deepest impact, not in the visible destruction, but in what it does to those who endure it. Soldiers began to experience something no one fully understood at the time. They froze under fire. They lost the ability to speak. Their hands trembled uncontrollably. Some could not move, even when ordered. It was called shell shock, but the term barely captured the reality. And it was not limited to the front lines. Back home, families waited in silence, surrounded by uncertainty. Letters arrived less frequently. News carried lists of names. Entire communities lived with a quiet tension, knowing that any moment could bring loss. The war entered homes, thoughts, and daily life, reshaping how people saw the world and their place in it. Here is the question that changes how you see this conflict. What happens when an entire generation is pushed beyond its psychological limits? When young men who once believed in glory return unable to reconnect with the life they left behind? When trust in leaders, in systems, even in the idea of progress itself begins to fade? The answer is not immediate. It does not end with the war. It lingers. It reshapes societies from within. It creates a silent fracture that will influence decisions, beliefs, and fears for years to come. Because once the mind is broken, the world that created that fracture cannot remain the same. The fall of giants. empires that could not survive. For centuries, Europe had been shaped by empires that seemed eternal. Their borders shifted, their rulers changed, but their existence felt permanent. They were pillars of order, symbols of continuity, structures that defined how the world functioned. And yet, in the span of a few years, these giants began to collapse from within. The war did not just weaken them, it exposed everything they had been trying to hide. The Austro-Hungarian Empire was already struggling to hold together a patchwork of nations that no longer wanted to be unified. The pressure of war accelerated its disintegration. Loyalty fractured, control slipped. What once appeared strong revealed itself as fragile. At the same time, the Russian Empire faced a different kind of collapse. Military failures, economic strain, and growing unrest pushed society to the breaking point. The authority of the Tsar, once unquestioned, began to crumble. Revolution was no longer a distant possibility. It became an unavoidable reality. Power shifted not gradually, but violently, reshaping the entire structure of the nation. Then there was the Ottoman Empire, an empire that had already been in decline, but now faced pressures it could not withstand. War drained its resources. Internal divisions deepened. External forces closed in. Piece by piece, it lost its ability to function as a unified power, until what remained was only a shadow of what once existed. Pause for a moment and consider the scale of this transformation. These were not minor states. These were empires that had shaped continents, influenced cultures, and defined history for generations. And yet, under the weight of war, they fell with a speed that shocked the world. What does it mean when structures that seem permanent suddenly disappear? What happens to the millions of people who lived under them, who built their identities around them, who trusted in their stability? The fall of these empires did not create clarity. It created uncertainty, new borders, new tensions, new struggles for power. And in that uncertainty, the foundations of a new and unstable Europe began to take shape. The war behind the front lines. While the world focused on the trenches, another battle was unfolding far from the gunfire. It was quieter, slower, but just as destructive. Entire nations were being pushed to their limits, not by enemy armies, but by exhaustion from within. Factories ran without pause, feeding the war machine with weapons, ammunition, and supplies. But production came at a cost. Resources became scarce. Food grew harder to find. Prices rose. What once felt like stability began to erode. Families stood in long lines, uncertain if there would be enough to survive the week. Hunger was no longer an exception. It became a shared reality. Governments tried to maintain control, but pressure kept building. Workers demanded more. Protests began to appear. Strikes spread through cities that had once symbolized strength and order. The war was no longer something happening far away. It was now inside homes, inside conversations, inside daily life. Every sacrifice asked of the people added to a growing sense of fatigue. And here is where the true weight of the conflict becomes clear. A nation can fight on the battlefield, but can it survive when its own people begin to lose faith? When the promise of victory no longer justifies the cost? When survival itself becomes the priority? Leaders faced a new kind of threat, not invasion, but collapse from within. Morale weakened, trust faded. The same systems that had mobilized millions now struggled to sustain them, and with every passing month, the question became more urgent, more dangerous. How long can a society endure when everything it depends on begins to break at once? The answer was already unfolding, and it would soon force decisions that would reshape the outcome of the war itself. The peace that planted future conflict. By 1918, the guns began to fall silent. Exhaustion replaced ambition. Nations that once spoke of victory now spoke of survival. The war had taken too much, lasted too long, and broken too many illusions. Peace was no longer a goal. It was a necessity. But what kind of peace could emerge from so much destruction? In 1919, leaders gathered to shape the future at the Treaty of Versailles. On the surface, it was meant to end the war, to restore balance, to prevent another catastrophe. But beneath the language of peace, something far more fragile was being constructed. Germany was forced to accept responsibility for the war. Its military was limited, its territories reduced, its economy burdened with heavy reparations. To those who imposed these terms, it was justice, a necessary consequence, a way to ensure that such a conflict could never happen again. But consider what this meant from the other side. A nation humiliated, a population struggling under economic pressure, a sense of injustice growing quietly, deeply. Instead of healing wounds, the treaty left them open. Instead of creating stability, it introduced resentment. And resentment does not disappear. It waits. This is the moment where the war seems to end, but something else begins. Because peace built on punishment carries its own risks. It may silence conflict temporarily, but it does not remove the forces that created it. It reshapes them, redirects them, and often makes them stronger. Ask yourself this: can a lasting peace be created when one side feels defeated, humiliated, and unheard? Or does that kind of peace simply delay the next conflict? The world believed it had closed a chapter, but in reality, it had written the opening lines of another. The echoes that shaped the modern world. When the war ended, people expected a return to normal life. A reset, a chance to rebuild what had been lost. But the world they stepped into was no longer the same. The war had not just changed borders, it had changed how nations thought, how societies functioned, and how the future would unfold. New countries appeared where empires once stood. Old alliances disappeared, replaced by fragile arrangements that struggled to maintain balance. Political systems shifted. In some places, democracy tried to take root. In others, instability created space for more extreme solutions. The certainty that had defined Europe before the war was gone, replaced by doubt and experimentation. At the same time, economies struggled to recover. Debts remained. Resources were limited. Entire populations faced uncertainty about their future. This was not a clean transition. It was a fragile reconstruction, where every decision carried the risk of creating new problems. And in that uncertainty, new ideas began to rise, some promising order, others feeding on fear. Here is the deeper transformation. The war changed how people understood power and conflict. It showed that modern warfare could reach a scale no one had imagined. It revealed that technology could amplify destruction beyond control. And it left a lasting question in the minds of those who witnessed it. If this could happen once, what would stop it from happening again? The consequences of the World War I did not remain in the past. They moved forward, shaping decisions, influencing leaders, and creating conditions that would define the decades to come. The world was not just recovering, it was being reshaped. And within that reshaping, the seeds of future conflict were already taking root. The war that never truly ended. Step back for a moment and look at what you have just witnessed. A continent at its peak, confident and unshaken, slowly revealing cracks that no one wanted to see. A single event exposing a system already under pressure. Decisions made with certainty turning into consequences no one could control. And a war that did not just destroy what existed, but reshaped everything that followed. It is tempting to believe that this was a story with a clear ending, that the silence of the guns in 1918 marked the conclusion. But history rarely works that way. The forces that led to the conflict did not disappear. They evolved. They adapted. They continued to influence the world in ways that were not immediately visible. The borders drawn after the war created new tensions. The political instability opened doors to radical change. The economic struggles deepened divisions, and the emotional scars carried by millions shaped how societies responded to fear, uncertainty, and power. None of this existed in isolation. It was all connected, forming a chain that extended far beyond the battlefield. Here is the question that remains. If a world so confident, so advanced, could walk into a disaster of that scale without realizing it, what does that say about the present? What tensions exist today beneath the surface, growing quietly, waiting for the right moment? The war did not just change Europe. It changed how history moves. It revealed how quickly stability can collapse, how fragile balance truly is, and how decisions made in moments of pressure can echo for generations. And that is why this story matters. Not because it belongs to the past, but because its consequences never fully disappeared. They remain, shaping the world you live in now, reminding you that the most dangerous turning points are often the ones no one sees coming.